Thank you for tuning in to the 1M Project podcast, where we have a vision to reach 1 million people for Jesus. Our mission is to unite, ignite, and equip followers of Jesus to evangelize and disciple communities.
So we ask you to join us in this mission here at 1M to make disciples of all nations and fulfill the Great Commission. We ask you to do this by joining us by sharing, subscribing, liking the content that we put out on social media, whether it's Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, or all forms of social media. And we invite you to be a part of this family and the calling which Jesus Christ has equipped us to do. Not just us here at 1M, but all of us as the body of Christ.
Well, here we are having another episode with no guest. Maybe you're the guest, or maybe I'm the guest. I don't know.
We're both guests.
We're both guests here on the show, but we just thought it'd be a good idea to come on here and just talk about what we're doing down at 1M with the evangelism class that we have going on Monday nights. That Ray is the director over at our at the 1M Project for evangelism and outreach efforts. And so he teaches our class on Monday nights. Currently, we're going through a series called The Art of Neighboring. It's a book series, and we're nearing the second half of the class, but we thought we'd kind of share where that idea came from, why we're doing this book, and then maybe share a little bit more about the fruit of what's happening from it. But it all started really when Ray and a group of us, myself and others from our church, Kingdom Life Church, went to the Expnential Conference out in Orlando, Florida, where the focus was on evangelism. So it made sense for us to go on out there. And they brought up a lot of different ideas on how to help you. And one of the ideas was this Art of Neighboring book, because one of the authors of this book, it's co-authored by two gentlemen, but one of the authors was a speaker there. And so somehow along the way, there was a video shown that laid out this idea. And while we were there, we were experiencing a lot of just community as a leadership team, being together for a few days, having meals together, being able to spend some time in the Word together around other believers from all over the world. So it's just like this awesome opportunity for us, and also just a time for growth as friends. And while we were there, we began to get excited about bringing it back to Muskegon. So much so that although we had just spent the week out in Florida, the night that we all returned home, we decided to meet up for pizza over at one of our friends' houses and talk about this. Like, how do we lay this out? How do we make this become something that we don't just have received ourselves, but how do we pass this off to our congregation and our community? And for me, from the 1M standpoint, I'm like, oh, we're gonna do this. We're gonna implement it into our evangelism training. We're gonna inspire the whole community to join us to have 100 tables this summer of dinner with their community, their neighbors. I mean, we're gonna go big. And so I'm now going to just ask you, as a result, because we've started the class, and we're about 4 or 5 weeks into this book series. How do you feel like it's going as the director over there for us and the teacher of this class? Like, is there anything that's surprising you about how this is going, or what's your favorite already about it?
Oh, there's a couple of favorite things. I don't know about one specific, but together how excited the people are in the class, how the simplicity of it. Like they didn't realize, some of them said, I didn't realize like how important it is just to get to know your neighbor, or how easy it can be. Some would be like, all I ever did was maybe just wave hi, but since the class, I'm inspired to go and ask their name. And then a few of them, once they got to know their name, they started up conversation and got to know more about their neighbor. And so there's testimony after testimony in the class about that. And as well as for me too. There's neighbors that's directly next to me that I don't know,
Yeah.
that I don't talk to because I rarely see them, but I was intentional about getting to know them and their name and more about them. And so that has happened, and so it's really stirred up something in me, even as a pastor. It's like, okay, we're commanded to love God with all our heart, soul, and mind, and love our neighbor as ourselves. And I love how they break it down in the book, saying usually we generalize that statement as everyone in the city and your state and the world, which is true. We should love everyone, but they said sometimes by doing so, you're actually neglecting your literal neighbors. And so that's the one thing that surprises me the most is how could we miss that? How do we miss that? How do we miss actually loving our neighbors? It's almost as if we don't take that commandment literally. And so that's what this book has done is it's caused me to look within myself to actually love my neighbors. And how do you do that? Well, first you got to get to know them. That's what this book does. It stirs up, and it stirred something up in me. So, well, you got to get to know them before you can even have a relationship with them. And so if that starts by saying hi, you're seeing them, and there's no interaction, just a hi, or you're seeing them cutting their grass, was the case for me, one of my neighbors. So I walked over to him and said, hey, my name's Ray, what's your name? He told me his name. And it's so let me back up. Let me say that. We have this fear in us sometimes, or we like to use the word shy, or we're introverted. And so we use these excuses not to get to know our neighbor. And to me, what I found, how easy it is, even in that state, even if you're shy, how easy it is to say hi or to walk over and say, hey, my name's Ray, what's your name? And then you'd be surprised what that can lead to. And so I found that true for myself, but in the class, people are finding that out also. People are getting to know their neighbors. They're talking to them. Some are already starting to plan block parties. I mean, people are praying for their neighbors. Now they know their name. So it's just been good. And I'm very blessed to have been in Orlando to hear when he talked about this, the pastor, and that we're implementing it here because it's something we all should do. I believe every church should do this, honestly, is to practice hospitality. And I guess we'll get into more about what that hospitality looks like because we're implementing this at our church, but I'll let you share a little more on that.
Yeah, I would like to talk about hospitality, but I wanted to share, even for me, coming home from Orlando, really under complete conviction, because I've shared with the class, but we live in the woods. I only knew one of my neighbors, and it was the people we bought our house from. They actually built a house in front of us. And so I was like, I don't even know how I would go about this. Like, I never see my neighbors, but the Lord, really convicted me. And I thought, how in the world could I have a vision to reach 1 million people for Jesus? And to the point where I, set out to start an organization that would have that vision and mission, but I don't even know my own neighbors and by name. Like, I'm not burdened for them. I don't necessarily care about their salvation. I just want to reach 1 million other people, I guess. I don't know. So like that was a heavy conviction on my end to say, like, this is something I can do. This is something I should be doing. And maybe that's why I was so fired up to say, we have to do this at our class. And we have to, I really want our church to implement this too. So let's talk about that, because the art of neighboring, as we've kind of been thinking through it, we kind of labeled it and termed it, because this was another concept they were really laying out at the conference too, is hospitality. And so we started a series at Kingdom Life last week called Radical Hospitality that we'll be doing this whole month, kind of in connection with this book. And you started us off last week and kind of really talked about a certain aspect of hospitality. So do you want to share kind of some of what you shared at our church last week?
Yeah, well, I started out this series of radical hospitality speaking on the table. And I think it speaks for itself. As human beings, all our lives, are, a lot of our lives are spent at the table.
Mhm.
I mean, that's the place where relationship begins. That's the place where there's intimacy.
Mhm.
That's the place where you reveal your innermost secrets or your desires or your hurts or your pains. And so throughout the Bible, the table is everywhere,
Mhm.
from the old to the new. I talked about it Sunday. It's when Abraham and the rest of them in the Old Testament had strangers come, they immediately
Mhm.
were shown hospitality. It was it's big. It was big in the culture back then, and I think we've lost sight of that in today's culture. And I get it; it's a different time, um, but we're still commanded to do the same thing,
Mhm.
to love our neighbors. And I think one of the points I made is even in relationships and when you meet your spouse, um, where is the place where you got to know them the most
Mhm.
besides the telephone, obviously, or texting? It's at dinner. It's where you guys talked and where you shared things. You talked about your past. You talked about your life for the most part, right?
I have to say, Ray, can we just say something about the obvious right now? You're getting married in how
Yeah,
many days?
yeah, 9 days.
Well, 9 days, probably not when this airs,
Yeah,
but
well, when this is
yes, I had to do that
filmed and
little
taped,
shout out. So
9 days.
yes, so and at that, you've gotten to know Rachel through this concept, but I didn't want
Yeah,
to cut you off or get you off guard there, but I had to just give a little shout out
yeah,
too.
no, that's true. You heard the old saying, the way to a man's heart
Yeah,
is food. Well,
through his
that's true,
stomach.
but it's or through the stomach, but
Yeah.
it's not just the way to his heart, it's the way of knowing his heart. And then you can vice versa that to the woman. It's a way of knowing our hearts. Jesus, he displayed it best. I mean, he was at the table of Matthew where the religious people were like, what is he doing there?
Hmm.
He was at the table of the Pharisees' house at times.
Yeah.
I mean, he was constantly at a table. Either he was a guest or he was the one planning it.
Hmm.
I mean, the upper room before the
Hmm.
Passover
Hmm.
in John 13, 14, 15, 16, it was at that table where you got those chapters that to me are some of the most profound chapters in the Bible. It's where Jesus was telling them about his
Yeah.
death, about his resurrection, about the Holy Spirit. He was just the communion.
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
that's a big thing in our faith is communion
Yeah.
itself. That was implemented obviously
Yeah.
at the table.
Well, and he served. I mean, he went around there, and that was like what he displayed at that Last Supper was that act of hospitality
Yeah.
by his servanthood
Yeah.
to his closest friends. You
Yeah.
know.
And that's the whole point. And that was the main point of my message.
Mhm.
It's all about giving. It's
Mhm.
all about serving. That's what we're called to do. If you want to be the greatest, Jesus says in the kingdom,
Mhm.
then become a servant of all. And that's the whole aspect of the table. It's bringing together different people, the stranger,
Yeah.
you
Yep.
know, and that Bible says over and
Yeah.
over again, the stranger. It's being a blessing to the people out there, the broken, the
Yeah.
lost, the addicted, those struggling with things. They just need validation. They need honor. They never been honored in their life. And so what I talked about Sunday was a lot of times when the aspect of the table, those who are serving, right, are honoring those who are being served.
Mhm.
Jesus said that. Who's greater,
Mhm.
the one serving or the one being served?
Mhm.
He said the one being served. And he said, yet here I am, the one serving. So he was giving us an example right there of how we actually implement the table. Invite the stranger, invite your neighbor.
Mhm.
And I get it in today's culture. Well, Pastor Ray, I just can't invite somebody into my house that I don't know. I understand that. Well, invite them over, invite them for coffee one time. Hey, can we meet at a restaurant?
Mhm. Right.
You know, um, this just came to me. There's a pastor at Kingdom Life who passed, who I love dearly,
Mm.
Pastor Bill. He was a model of this. he modeled this perfect.
Mm.
He was always meeting with people over lunch,
Mm-hmm.
over dinner, and he was mentoring them. He was speaking life into them
Mm-hmm.
at the table. At the table. And I mean, I'm sure we can even interview many of them. I'm one of them.
Yeah.
Where he was just establishing relationship at the table.
Mm-hmm.
And so this table, it's vital, and that's what this book is about. We're implementing the table. We're telling people, hey, start something in your neighborhood, invite people over, have a barbecue, have a bonfire. That's where you get to know people, and then it's in that place where you can actually understand them better. I'll end this with one example in the book. In this neighborhood, there was a certain person who had a house that was kind of blighted, tore down, porch was messed up, gutters were hanging down, and there was another neighbor who kind of didn't like that, let's just say. And so what he did is he called the city on this house, and they came, they ticketed the house and all this, and it come to find out he was having a conversation, the guy who called, he was having a conversation with another neighbor. And the other neighbor told him, yeah, this is a single woman there, and she's living there taking care of her mom. Her mom has cancer, and she's going through all these medical procedures and problems, and she has no help. She doesn't have time for her house or this. And it so convicted that man that what he did was get other neighbors together, and they helped fix her gutters, her porch, and they were just there for her after this. And so that's the point that I'm trying to make about this book and even about the table. He didn't know this lady. He presumed something instead of getting to know the real story behind it. And so what the table does is it offers us an opportunity to actually get to know our neighbors, we actually get to know maybe their story, what they're going through.
Yeah.
And it's in that place where we can now be effective in implementing the great commandment of loving our neighbor, making disciples, praying for them, helping them, being the hands and feet of Jesus. But I believe it all starts at the table because that's the place of intimacy. That's the place of intimacy.
Yeah.
So
It's
I
where
love what it's
relationship
doing.
is formed.
Yeah, it's where relationship is formed. And that's the whole point of the book. That's the whole point of what we're doing now at Kingdom Life. And yeah, I just love how it's impacting not only my life, but those at the class at 1M. And even some people who I talk to, you know, at church, and how it stirred them up to be a better neighbor, or to invite people over for dinner, or to take them out for dinner or lunch or whatever. So.
Yeah, I agree. It's such a tool that we don't always understand, that we need to be using to build relationships, not just for evangelism, but also discipleship. It's like the easiest method to kind of to practice to help you if you really have a heart to reach the lost or to, disciple others. So the table is the tool.
Right. I mean, and there's different types. Like the series we got going on, mine was a table. We're going to do different aspects of hospitality, and one is community, one is communal. And you'll be sharing on that this coming Sunday. You want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'll share just a little bit, and then we can close it out. But we have an epidemic right now of loneliness, and as a world, there's a lot of research out there right now to support that there's a statistic that says 3 out of 5 Americans are reporting to being lonely right now, and I've got a whole sermon to lay all of this out here that I'll be teaching in a few weeks or this coming Sunday. But there's a problem, and our people in our church, but also in our community, need relationship, and the table is an opportunity to build that relationship. And I think that we need to do better this as a whole in the Christian community at being better neighbors and also understanding the importance of community. But I'm kind of fumbling through here because I don't want to start a whole another podcast or conversation. So we'll keep that for the next episode, and we'll talk about communal hospitality and how we can do that better as a community.